Good evening, y'all. Welcome to
Good evening.
Countercultural Sexuality. I'm Nick, and we
Plutarch
got
up here.
here. There you go.
And Steve.
And we're talking about today a rather controversial figure in church history. A very intellectual man in church history. A very profound man. Not a perfect man. And we're going to critique him a little bit. And I agree with him in some parts, probably. But it's Mr. Robert Louis Dabney, or R.L. Dabney. And the question is he the patriarch of the Red Pill?
So he was what, Presbyterian?
Yep, Southern Presbyterian.
Okay. So let's have a Catholic man introduce him. You want to cue that up, Plutarch?
This is Peter Howland on Citizens for Community Media. And the last show I had on Israel, Patriarchy Rules, we need to keep going into the idea that the fathers are to rule the home. Jesus gave kind of a startling parable, Luke 19:27. And he closes the parable and concludes by saying, "But those mine enemies, which would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me." So the idea is the husband in the home is to rule. But in today's culture, the argument is...
Did I queue up the wrong one? I'm looking at the email here.
I think you did.
All right, we'll fix that.
But it's the same thought in Dabney. The husband is to rule the home. He does teach that quite explicitly.
All right. Okay, this is the right one then?
Yeah, that's the right one.
I think so.
This is Peter Howland on the show Israel. The title there is Patriarchy and Politics. I happened to come across a dissertation out of Baylor University. It was finished in 2006 by a fellow named Davenport. And it was dealing with, the title of it was Patriarchy and Politics, and he singled out Robert Filmer and Robert Louis Dabney. Now, people here locally, South Bend, public access, probably for maybe 25 years ago, I talked a lot on Robert Louis Dabney. And he was considered the best theologian in the country by the president of Princeton Seminary. In fact, he said, if not the world. And Stonewall Jackson chose him to be his chief of staff for 6 months, right in the thickest of the battles. And the reason Jackson chose him is that Jackson was extremely devoted Christian, and he wanted the best theologian at his side, guiding his purpose. We're going to look at patriarchy, and then we're going to try to.
Yeah, well, that's the introduction.
There you go. So I'll add my thing to the stage here.
Now, let me add
Robert
mine
Louis
first.
Dabney. You want to add
Okay,
yours
go ahead.
first?
No,
right.
you can go do that.
Dabney is born 1820, lived to 1898 AD. He's born in Virginia. You can find information out about the classic biography is The Life and Letters of Robert Louis Dabney. It's written in 1903 by Thomas Carey Johnson. There's a more critical but sympathetic biography, Robert Louis Dabney, a Southern Presbyterian by Sean Michael Lucas. Got that right here. And then there's a short but great introduction by Zachary Garris on Dabney that can be found in Dabney on Fire, a theology of parenting, education, feminism, and government, which contains the women's rights women, which we'll be talking about today. So we'll see a good overview Dabney's given on the Banner of Truth website, which I am going to pull up real quick. There you go. I'm going to zoom in. There you go. Zoom. So he's a planter, a quarryman, builder, teacher, pastor, architect, theologian, writer, army chaplain, soldier, husband, and father. He was educated at Hampton Sydney College. Then he went to eventually went to the University of Virginia. Then he went to Union Theological Seminary. And he completed his studies at Union Seminary in 1846 and became a preacher at Tinkling Spring Church in the Shenandoah Valley. He became a doctor of divinity in Union Theological Seminary, and he taught at Union Theological Seminary as well. He was a chaplain in the Confederacy and later chief of staff to General Stonewall Jackson. He even wrote General Stonewall Jackson's biography at the request of his widow, his wife, Mrs. Jackson. He continued to teach after the war, even though before the war he was offered to teach a professorship at basically the Presbyterian Seminary, which was Princeton Theological Seminary. He denied that. After the war, he continued teaching. Then he was one of the founding faculty members at the University of Texas in the year it was founded, 1883. He's professor of mental and moral philosophy and political economy. He taught there for 11 years, and then he also co-founded Austin Theological Seminary. So he went blind towards the end of his life. And he had many things that were quite controversial during his time and continue to be controversial down to this day. In fact, he predicted many things that came to pass. One of which was, as our teaser said, oh, not that, and it is this one that we talked about last time on women's rights women. It says, so it will be found, and it is no disparagement to women to say it, that the very traits which fit her to be the angel of a virtuous home unfit her to meet the agitations of political life, even as safely as does the more rugged man. The hot glare of publicity and passion will speedily deflower her delicacy and sweetness. Those temptations which her maker did not form her to bear will debauch her heart, developing a character as much more repulsive than that of the debauched man as the fall has been greater. The politicking woman, unsexed and denaturalized, shorn of the true glory of her femininity, will appear to men as a feeble hybrid mannequin with all the defects and none of the strength of a male. Instead of being the dear object of his chivalrous affection, she becomes his importunate rival, despised without being feared. Says this suggests a third consequence, which some of the advocates of the movement even already are bold enough to foreshadow. Women's rights means the abolition of all permanent marriage ties. We were told that Mrs. Katie Stanton avowed this result, proclaiming it at the invitation of the Young Men's Christian Association in New York. She holds that women's bondage is not truly dissolved until the marriage bond is annulled. She is thoroughly consistent. Some hoodwinked advocates of a revolution may be blind to the sequence, but it is inevitable. It must follow by this cause, if for no other, that the unsexed politicking woman can never inspire in man that true affection on which marriage should be founded. Men will doubtless be still sensual, but it is simply impossible that they can desire them for the pure and sacred sphere of the wife. Let every woman ask herself, will she choose for the lord of her affections an unsexed effeminate man? No more can man be drawn to the masculine woman. The mutual attraction of the two complementary halves is gone forever. The abolition of marriage would follow again by another cause. The divergent interests and the rival independence of the two equal wills would be irreconcilable with domestic government or union or peace. Shall the children of this monstrous no union be held responsible to two variant, coordinate, and supreme wills at once? Heaven pity the children. Shall the two parties of this perpetual co-partnership have neither the power to secure the performance of the mutual duties nor to dissolve it? It is a self-contradiction, an impossible absurdity. Such a co-partnership of equals with independent interests must be separable at will, as all other such co-partnerships are. The only relation between the sexes which will remain will be a cohabitation, continuing so long as the convenience or caprice of both parties may suggest, and this with most will amount to a vagrant concubinage. But now, what will the character of the children reared under such a domestic organization as this? If human experience has established anything at all, is the truth of the principle announced by the Hebrew prophet when he declared the great aim of God in ordaining a permanent marriage tie between one man and one woman was that he might seek a godly seed. God's ordinance, the only effective human ordinance for checking and curbing the first tendencies to evil, is domestic parental government, when the family shall no longer have a head. The great foundation for the subordination of children in the mother's example is gone. When the mother shall have found another sphere than her home for her energies, then she shall have exchanged the sweet charities of domestic love and sympathy for the fierce passions of the hustings. When families shall be disrupted at the caprice of either party, and the children scattered as foundlings from their hearthstone, it requires no wisdom to see that a race of sons will be reared nearer akin to devils than to men, in the hands of such a bastard progeny, without discipline, without homes. Without a God, the last remains of social order will speedily perish, and society will be overwhelmed in savage anarchy. Last, it would not be hard to show, did space permit, that this movement on the part of these women is as suicidal as it is mischievous. Its certain result will be the re-enslavement of women, not under the scriptural bonds of marriage, but under the yoke of literal corporeal force. And his words have come to pass in our day.
So, all of us guys who have adopted the red pill didn't arrive here without some experience. I mean, we kind of bought into the whole blue pill idea. You marry a good woman, be a good man, support her, and yeah, everything will turn out okay. So I wanted to,
Right.
I reflected on how did Dabney learn kind of about the nature of women. So I thought back to the time he lived. Prior to 1850, well, the Seneca Falls Conference was in 1851
1848.
or
1848.
1848. Okay, so that's prior to the Civil War. So he was
Right.
aware of this. Then he was around during the Civil War, and during war, soldiers like prostitutes. That's true even today. So I went back to look up prostitution during the Civil War. So let's bring up this Love and War, Civil War's impact on prostitution. And I'm just going to read a couple things out of here. This was written in 2020 by Sydney Sheed. That's a woman. But I think this is a pretty fair thing. Okay. The lack of regulation changed with the beginning of the Civil War in 1861 as large numbers of soldiers congregated in major cities. This influx of men led to an increase in prostitution as women sought to make money from soldiers from both Union and Confederate armies. Prostitution became common among troops, and prostitutes were abundant in cities occupied by soldiers. In 1861, Union Lieutenant Josiah M. Favell wrote in his diary that in the city of Alexandria, almost every house was filled with prostitutes, demonstrating the prevalence of prostitution during the war. In July 1863, the Star ran an article about a Union soldier being unable to retrieve a watch he had left at a brothel in Pennsylvania. The point of this article was to expose a house of prostitution for committing theft, not to focus on the fact that a soldier visited a prostitute, highlighting how often soldiers saw prostitutes during the war. An article published in Memphis Daily Bulletin on April 30th, 1863, stated that women of ill fame consort with civil and military officers in broad daylight, once again demonstrating that soldiers' involvement with prostitutes was commonplace. Personal accounts also support the prevalence of prostitution during the Civil War. Samuel Cormery, a Union soldier, expressed throughout his diary during the war that he longed to be a better man, and upon returning home to his wife, he confessed to her that he had sexual relations with prostitutes during the war. Prostitution became a part of the Civil War, and the fact that soldiers engaged with prostitutes was widely accepted. While loose morals and a lack of soldier focus accompanied prostitution, soon something more sinister threatened the troops: venereal disease. Generals began to worry as their soldiers contracted diseases in mass numbers. Specific to the Union Army, 78,000 white soldiers contracted and were diagnosed with syphilis during the Civil War, and more than 100,000 soldiers became infected with gonorrhea. Sexual disease presented a larger problem than the temporary illness and discomfort of soldiers. Those soldiers who did contract venereal diseases were often unable to perform the physical duties required of them during the war. In severe cases, venereal disease resulted in death. It is estimated that 1/3 of the soldiers who died in veterans' homes, both Confederate and Union, died of venereal disease. A total of 224,000 Union soldiers and 164,000 Confederate soldiers died of disease. That's the total. So take 1/3 of that. Venereal disease posed a threat to both the health of soldiers and the strength of both armies. During the middle of a domestic war, people feared for the future of the United States government, and the issue of diseased soldiers did nothing to help ease the public distress. Without healthy soldiers, both Union and Confederate troops were at risk of being weakened before even fighting any battles. So, since Dabney was chief of staff to Stonewall Jackson, do you think the issues of prostitutes were frequently discussed, and troop strength? And he was a pastor, and he was sensitive to what was going on here. So I think he saw the behavior and he saw the implications.
I think he did.
And then also I learned that Nashville and Memphis were pretty bad with prostitution when the Union occupied them. Well, I don't have proof of this, but I'm thinking most of the prostitutes in those cities were Southern women.
Probably.
And so women didn't, there wasn't any welfare, so they had to live and they had to earn money, and it was the easiest way. So if Southern women were prostituting themselves to the Yankees, I bet it was an issue of discussion in the South after the war.
Yeah.
War brides. It's a thing.
It's a thing.
So, I mean, the behavior of women today is probably no different.
Didn't we also talk about where the term hooker came from?
Yeah.
When we had didn't we have that discussion yesterday? We were talking.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. That was in.
So it actually originates from the Civil War, correct?
Yeah. I got to find it in here. I think it's right in this paragraph that I skipped over. Yeah. Here it is. Soldiers' infatuation with prostitutes did not go unnoticed by Army generals, with some viewing prostitution as a distraction and worrying about the immorality of their soldiers. Union General Joseph Hooker, worried about his mischievous soldiers, attempted to aid police in Pennsylvania in herding prostitutes into one area of the city so they could not engage with as many soldiers. So, okay, that's it. It was called Hooker's Division. And so he basically rounded them up and licensed them so to try and regulate prostitution. And then in Nashville, they rounded up all the prostitutes, sent them north on steamboats, but that didn't work because no city was willing to take them, so they sent them back to Nashville.
Okay, well, so that's where hookers come from. The term hooker, I think, originates then from that gentleman.
So, I mean, it was a big deal. I mean, sexual immorality, prostitutes, it was a topic of discussion. And I can't help but believe that formed some of Dabney's observations.
Yeah, let's look at that here in a second once I get this page to load on my computer. There we go. Come on. So we're getting to this question: is Dabney red pill, or is Dabney have the normal tendency of men to simp? I think it's actually both. I think he simps a little, but he's also a bit aware.
Well, how many times have we in the modern red pill looked at a guy in the red pill and go, dude, you're simping right now?
Yeah. And to be fair, this is before red pill was, quote unquote, coined and invented. Now, he also attacks, for some of our more pickup artistry guys in the red pill, he's definitely not a sympathizer to their cause. He's against the degeneracy of plate spinning pickup artistry, but he also has a bad bent of teaching. Let's look at the contra-degeneracy first. So he's against the degeneracy. Or the sleeping around that Steve was talking about. He says, there is no sin so gross as that of unchastity, which is so nearly tolerated in males by public opinion, partly because so seldom discussed. Teachers being deterred by a theory of delicacy. Hence the necessity that all the sins be rebuked. But it is also common to speak of the animal impulse to these sins as one so strong that it is scarcely reasonable to expect its control. And indeed, to regard their uncontrollable strength as rather an element of praiseworthy manhood. The shameless impudence of this is sufficiently rebuked by naming such men as Lee and Jackson, such men as Chase's Dane. I think it's Dane. I could be saying that wrong. At whose mess tables, though surrounded only by rough, battle-stained men, no word was ever heard or tolerated that would have tinged the cheeks of their pure and venerated wives and daughters. Had these heroes full manhood? Were they less men because scrupulously chaste than the creatures whose chosen trait of manhood is the one which most assimilates them to the ass and the goat? Ha! He is most the man who can always govern himself. He who cannot is he who cannot is to that extent an imbecile. He says, many young men delude themselves by joining in the stern condemnation of seduction of the innocent, and then claim that indulgence with those already abandoned is no sin. Sound familiar to the red pill guys? Or a venial one, and the partner of the sin is made no worse. Is that like recycling recreational use only single mothers? Okay. He says all this is deplorable sophism. In that first, they are imbruting themselves, and all the more as the paramour is more reprobate. And he cites Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 15 and 16. He says, this poor woman is so degraded, forsooth, as to be beyond reform, beyond hope as well. That is the body of moral patricians, of which you make yourself a member.
Oh,
boy.
no.
So there was
He'll
some
be
weather
back.
down where, yeah, he'll be back. There was some weather down in where he is today, as they had thunderstorms. So he might have. There he is.
I'll start again.
Did you click buttons?
I don't know. I
It's just amateur hour here.
Yep, we're doing amateur hour today.
Oh, he's frozen again. You know, this is, that last paragraph he read was, gee, if she's already a whore and she's got a body count of 101 and I partake, well, did I really do any damage? Now she's just 102. That's hardly any difference. So did I destroy her? Not really. No, that was just a trivial thing. She was already lost.
You're right. You didn't destroy her, but you did yourself no favors.
Yeah, and that's he did say, Dabney did say that in that quote. Somehow that the man is doing destruction to himself, and he's actually culpable for that.
Well, and I think one of the points that needs to be discussed in our community, in the red pill space, is this concept of, yes, you can, you can fuck around with whores, and you can use them and pump and dump or whatever you want to do. You can do that. It is technically possible, but consider why the prostitutes were so legion in these cities during the war. Everyone's going to say, oh, well, poor woman, they needed the money, and so they were war brides. Okay.
Right.
They needed the money because there was no welfare, but these men were quite willing to partake of it on offer. And that doesn't help. That doesn't help the men. That's why the generals were so worried about it. And it promotes more degeneracy amongst the women, because those women go to their girlfriends who are, beat down. The wars come to their town, and they say, "Hey, I made a whole bunch of money on."
Oh, and it was big money, just like it's big money today. I mean, they couldn't make much money washing clothes or cooking or whatever. They wouldn't do that well. But as a prostitute, they would earn more money than a man with a good paying job. And you know what they spent their money on? You got to guess.
Trivia stuff.
No. Fancy clothes.
To sell themselves. Even better.
Well, women don't wear clothes just to sell themselves. They just like fashion.
That's true.
And, just fancy clothes, and they could walk around town dressed in the finest clothes. Wow, they're really special now.
Yet again, proving that it's a virtue signal to the other women. And I'm using the word virtue loosely here, but it's a signal to other women. See, I've got this status. I got these fancy clothes. Yeah, all I had to do was open my legs to those, opposing soldiers. I've got no morals about, and guys, the women in war, they don't care. They don't care what side you're on. You can look at World War II. It was the same thing.
Yeah, there was a lot of this going on in France.
Exactly.
A lot. I think Nick is back.
I don't see him down there.
I heard a ding, but maybe it didn't.
It didn't click in.
It didn't take.
Yeah.
Now he completely disappeared.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Now he's back. There we go.
Computer's acting up. So where were we?
Well, we were just talking about prostitutes during war, and
Okay, so I'll present this.
here's a comment from Big Mike here. The Karens are out in force. They've been out in force the past 24 hours. YouTube's been kind of flaky.
So where are the Karens showing up?
Oh, it's a joke. Yeah. The YouTube is somehow cutting off Nick over here in
Oh,
StreamYard.
I see. That was the joke. I didn't get that.
Boomer moment.
Okay.
So
boy, Nick is not doing so well tonight.
Yeah, and this was the one that he wanted to put together.
So the other thing, we blame prostitution or sex workers. Well, the women don't really have any other options, and they just have to do it for money. Otherwise, they'd starve. But right now, arguably, we have more sex workers per capita than we've had in maybe since the Civil War. Are they doing it because they'd starve otherwise? Or are they just doing it because they can't? We have welfare. There's jobs. They can go out and work any kind of job. Yeah, it might not be a lot of money, but they're not going to starve. But yet they choose sex work because it is very lucrative. So you don't have to bring a woman to starvation before she chooses sex work.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because the amount of sex work has actually increased since, it's been increasing for decades, but really it's the thing that increased it was the advent of streaming internet video. So early 2010s.
It increased men's use of pornography too. And there was pornography. I read something about that in the Civil War. They were selling pictures and you could get mail order prophylactics sent to you in discreet packages. Yeah. I just laughed when I saw that. Okay, nothing new here.
No, and pornography has been around since the dawn of the printing press,
Yeah.
So that is nothing surprising. At least it shouldn't be surprising. But I think that really the reason that women choose to do it is because even today it is the easiest money out there. Women don't have to learn anything to do it. You come pre-equipped with all the equipment you're ever going to need. So you don't have to buy, okay, you might have to go out and buy a fancy dress, okay, in theory, but in reality you don't. So you don't need to buy anything. And all you have to do is say, "Hey, I will offer you myself in exchange for some cash." And it's going to be a lot of cash because women know how important it is to them. They know how important their chastity is. So they charge a lot for it, and men pay it because they know that it's worth so much. And it creates this sort of feedback cycle of, well, it's worth so much, so I got to pay for it.
Well, it's completely normal and natural from this standpoint. Now, let me explain. So a young woman, she wants a future life, a future with a man, And so let's say she's a chaste woman who wants to get married. Well, what's her ticket to getting married? Well, she knows she has something valuable between her legs. She knows she's going to have to give that up. She has a desire for sexual union. But she knows that's part of the package that she brings to a man in marriage. So when she's looking for her future, she thinks, oh, what do I have between my legs that I can facilitate? Now, if she doesn't want to make a commitment, what does she think about? Oh, what's this thing between my legs that I can use to get money and live the life I want? It's the same focus. One is a good focus, or one is a proper use. The other one is improper. I'm being kind of crass here, but I think it's accurate.
Well, and I don't have it queued up, but last night during the Whatever podcast, they played a clip from Patrice O'Neill. He was up on stage, he was doing a bit, and he asks the women in the audience, so let's say you're in a horrific train accident tomorrow, and your genitals become unavailable. They have to take them out. You don't have them anymore. Everything else works fine. Just that's gone. What would you offer to your husband to keep him around? And all the ladies start saying, oh, they just start offering the other holes. They don't talk about anything else. And Andrew was kind of like, well, why don't they, why? Right. Even and Patrice's point was not that, his point was really, look, even when we take that away from you, you still quantify yourselves. You still value yourselves in the sexual pleasure you can give a man.
Well, does that imply that it's not primarily men that objectify women sexually? It's women who objectify themselves first?
I would say that has to be true. I mean, you were talking about fashion earlier. Who spends all the time looking at fashion magazines? It's not men. Who spends money on clothes without thought? It's women. The fashion industry is built on women spending, which is why the fashion industry is so feminist, because they need women to have free and unfettered access to money to buy their wares.
Yeah. Do you know how much time a young daughter, let's say 16 years old, do you know how much time she spends in front of a mirror?
I have no idea.
A lot. Do you know her phone? Do you know how many pictures she takes of herself every day?
Well, on the basis of the amount of time that my wife spends taking pictures of various outfits, I'm going to say a lot, because
I bet and then she gets together with her girlfriends and they, cozy up to each other and stick out their tongues and take a picture. I mean, I bet the average young lady takes a picture of at least 10 pictures of herself during every single day.
it reminds me of a meme I saw on the internet, and it's a picture. It's just a two frame meme. The top picture and the caption, it's just a picture of a Bible on a table, and it says "guy taking a photo," and there's the object right there, and it's a Bible. And then in the bottom panel, it's woman taking a photo of the object, and there's a girl leaning in, taking a selfie, and you can just see the last little corner of the Bible in the selfie. That's women.
Well, yeah, and furthermore, I don't have anything to back this up. No observation whatsoever. But when women are spending a lot of time in the bathroom, especially young women, do you think they're looking at their naked bodies in the mirror and turning this way and that way and admiring themselves and whatever? I think they are so self-focused on their bodies and how they look that, yeah, I think it's going on. But, we'd need someone to actually tell the truth about
Well,
what they're doing all that time in the bathroom. Who knows? I don't know.
They don't even have to be naked. They could just be just trying to figure out what angle works for them. With clothes, even, it's just what angle does my neck look best in?
Yeah. Well, now Nick is back. So we've just been
Yeah, sorry, I
bantering and
bombed that
filling
one.
up the time.
I bombed that one. Sorry, guys. My
The leader
screen stopped
abandoned us.
working. I got totally, my screen stopped working and everything. It was really my Adobe didn't want to work, and I don't know. So we'll see if this works a little better. I'm going to use
What can we say? It's a
Microsoft
channel
Word.
run by a bunch of boomers.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You guys have to be honorary boomers because you're not even close to being boomers.
Not age-wise, no.
See, well,
But
it won't even let me share my window anymore. Crap. Okay, so I have to share my entire screen. So you can see my screen now. I'm going to go to that. Can you guys see
Okay.
that?
yeah, we can see
Yeah.
that.
This works.
All right. So where were we? Yeah. It's talking about the poor woman is so degraded for us to be beyond reform, beyond hope as well. That is the body of moral patriotism of which you make yourself a member. Second, if someone else pushes her into the mire of vice, you will help to hold her down in it until she is smothered to death. That is palliation. Third, you say, God forbid that the ladies of the South, whose purity is the glory of our land, should ever lose one shade of their chastity. However, I may indulge my heat of youthful blood, but you are doing the very thing which has the regular tendency to debauch them, because the habits of young men ultimately become known. These ladies must either forego marriage, their natural lot, or marry those whom they know as rakes. Their minds must be debauched by this.
Hey,
Because
hold
a loose
on.
male sex ultimately results in a loose female sex. Ooh, some hard words for
I
some.
just realized something. Garden tools,
Yeah.
hose, and rakes.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it comes from. Civil War. The men were the rakes.
So basically saying like these men debauch them and doesn't make them really good marriage material. These loose women, these 304s, these garden tools, right?
Well, and we see that today. We have all these women running around who and in the red pill we say it, okay, she got more than 10 bodies on her, you don't marry her. She's for recreate.
Mhm.
Well, like where the term for recreational use only comes from.
Right.
And
And he's going after them for that.
Rich Cooper did a stream today about, I think it was the one he did today. If a woman
Yeah, he
has
did.
a
I
body
watched
count
part of
of
it.
5, her risk of divorce or tendency to divorce increases by a factor of 6. 6
wow.
times.
yikes.
Wasn't that she cheat on you? I thought it was that she cheated.
Oh, maybe
on
that was it. Cheat on
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Infidelity. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then if it's up to 10, it's only 9 times. So, the damage going from 5 to 10 is less than the damage going from 0 to 5.
That actually follows, because if you think back to the prior stream we did, and we were talking about the CCS last week, we were talking about the effects of porn. It's the same drug. It's the same hormones.
Sure.
So it's going to have that same effect of you're going to need ever higher hits of dopamine and oxytocin and all those hormones.
Mhm.
So, and men do contribute to this by offering themselves up to it, by being so easily swayed by by base female nature. I'm sorry, but you cannot tell me that running around tagging women is something that a guy with high levels of frame is going to do.
No, you're fooling yourself and you're an imbecile, according to the Dabney.
Well,
You're being
you're definitely
controlled
fooling yourself
by your passions.
right? Exactly.
And you're increasing the degeneracy. Now Dabney says these poor women, he's pitying these whores, you know, but he still says they're not marriage material. Hey,
Which
look at all the
the
women
Red Pill
today.
agrees with.
They're no better than these prostitutes. He would probably think, except that maybe they don't get paid for it.
But I think the key point here that I'm going to update the language here. I'm going to say, you know, when you have these guys running around just fucking everything that moves, you're trying to tell me that these guys are strong men with frame? No, these guys live in the passions of women, and they can. Okay, look at what happened with Fresh and Fit, or particularly Walter. Whether or not he is actually the you know, whether or not there was ever a kid or he was actually the father, if there was, and I don't think there was ever a kid based on what we've heard since. The point was, by behaving the way he did, he opened himself up to this.
It's a loss of frame.
Right. A man with frame is not going to open himself up to being abused by a woman like this. But it takes a level of self-control that most men don't have. And that's, if frame is self-control, then running around tagging hot girls just because you can is not self-control. It's the opposite of it.
That's correct. But you see here this underlying thing that we're going to have to criticize Dabney on.
Mm-hmm.
He keeps defending. I mean, he says they're not marriage material, but there's this like subconscious, I would say, defense of these terrible women that man is bad, that man is to blame. And you see that with that closing statement. A loose male sex ultimately results in a loose female sex. There's sort of truth there. But you see over and over, he's talking about the men. Can you see my screen?
No.
Okay. So I'm going to hit share again. You should be able to see my screen now. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So man bad. Speaking on adulterers, Dabney writes, another face usually makes the male's guilt the greater. That he is, I think it might be another fact instead of face, but that he is often the first suggester, tempter, and seducer. That's from the Practical Philosophy, page 363.
Yeah. Not sure
Yeah.
that's true.
No. Well,
Okay.
I'm thinking back to the whatever.
True. It could be true.
Yeah, but look at the loose women.
Right. Was it true in his day though? I don't know.
No. These
Okay.
women were sirens. What was that story? Is that Jason and the Argonauts, right?
No, you're talking about
the Iliad.
The Iliad and the Odyssey.
Yeah, the Odyssey.
Yeah, and they had to like tie him to the mast, I think, and plug his ears or something.
Right,
yes.
because of the sirens.
Yeah.
The women and mermaids. The whole thing of mermaids were these feminine sea creatures that seduced sailors and then killed them.
Well, and the thing is if you read the ancients, they understood this. And we
This-
and lots of people today say, oh, that's just evil patriarchy, and I'm not sure that it's evil
No.
patriarchy. I think they really understood that it was women, because the Bible talks about it too. The Bible,
It
yes,
does. The
men
Bible
are
does.
bad, but so you look throughout history, and it's only really within the past few hundred years that we see this move towards this idea that it's really men's fault that women are so.
Mhm.
Oh, now I'm going to argue like a female. Do you mean all women? Do you mean
No.
all men are seduced by all women?
No, I'm speaking in
No.
generalities here.
But the men can
mean,
be the
they're- men-
seducer too.
Sure.
Let's
Oh,
be
sure.
Men
honest.
can
That does
seduce.
happen.
Yes.
That does happen.
But
I think his
predominantly
generalization
men
is
seduce.
wrong. I think his generalization is wrong, like you guys. So notice how he keeps saying this. He speaks of the seducer as masculine and speaks to the acted result of seduction as follows. They are perpetrated through a treason the most loathsome, the assumption of the beneficent emotion of love, the abuse of a real, generous, though misguided love in his victim, aggravated by subsequent desertion and contempt. The seducer is supposed to be meaner than a murderer and hardly less mischievous.
Well, there is that type of man.
Yeah,
A
no
sweet
doubt.
talker that goes out and charms his way into a lady's panties and
Hmm.
Sure.
has his way and just abandons her. But that's a
Maybe 10%.
small
of men.
minority.
Maybe 10%.
There might have been more of
Yeah.
that back then because the women were younger and in their parents' homes. So, generally speaking,
Well, okay, but even then, 10% is probably a lot, because if you look at today, in today's numbers, I'd say you'll probably be lucky to find 5% of guys who are like that. Now,
That's-
we have demasculinized men, but since then, but like, how many men do you guys know? And I'm gonna say this anecdotally, but how many men do you guys know who can just walk up to a woman and chat her up and get her number? It's not many, is it?
no.
Right.
currently maybe 1,
Yeah.
2.
I think I
It's
know of
not
one
that
who can
hard.
do
I
it.
don't think it's that hard, guys. But I also don't care. I'm not looking, so it doesn't bother
Well,
me.
I mean, to get her number and charm her and take her home and bed her. I mean, I'm thinking a little bit
Oh, yeah.
further than just get her number.
Well, get her number
Of
so
course,
that you
people
can.
don't get phone numbers anymore. That
Yeah,
was
well,
happening 10, 15 years ago.
showing our age over here. This is the boomer hour, guys. I look at this and I go, but then you see, because while Nick was getting himself reset there, Steve and I were talking about, you see the rise of promiscuous women on the internet. You see the rise. There are more sex workers now than there ever have been as a percentage of the population. So in a per capita sense, and that cannot be because there has been a concomitant rise of Don Juans out there who are eating this stuff up. No, it's not. Remember the numbers that we dug up for the porn episode that we did? No, it's not the Don Juans out there feeding this.
It's the unrestrained rebellion of, well, it's female nature taken in rebellion and has no restraint really
Well,
by church, home, or society.
what's the easiest thing for a woman to do to make money? Spread her legs.
Tell her body.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have seen an explosion of women selling their bodies, not as demand has gone up, but as the cost to do it has gone down. The real explosion you see in women selling their bodies occurs after streaming video on the internet becomes reasonably cheap to do. So you're talking early 2010s. You see this explosion in it happening, and yes, there was an economic downturn at the time. I'm sure that played into women deciding to do it, but it got a lot easier to do it. And so, as soon as it got easier to sell themselves, women went and sold themselves in higher numbers. Men didn't do that. We didn't drive that. We might
No,
have
but the
consumed
men are
it.
certainly willing to partake of that bounty.
Yes, they are.
So, what is the one thing that can reduce the promiscuity of young men and young women? The one thing. It's the same thing.
Consequence?
No. What kept it in check historically?
Well, fathers kept it in check historically.
Fathers. And was
Oh.
it just nice guy fathers? No. It was discipline. I mean, it was actually physical force. And the Bible talks about that. The Bible is not against raising your hand or using the rod against your children. Now, okay, I just can we just do a thought experiment and just talk about history without someone saying, "Well, he's advocating beating kids," and well, no. Okay, I just want to go through historically. Men in the family had that power, and they often were too severe, but they had that authority, and they could use physical force to discipline. And education is basically a fancy word for discipline, to instill that in their sons, to not go out and do this kind of things, and their daughters, to keep their legs closed. The father is the constant here, and what's been pretty much emasculated or removed from the family, the father. Is there any solution other than to put the father back in charge?
Not really.
I don't think so. But it's interesting that in the first thing that Nick read, Dabney very specifically calls this out. That it is the fathers who raise their children in, and if the fathers aren't there because the marriage bond has been annulled,
Mhm.
then it spoils the, now of course Dabney said spoils the sons. But I think the implication there is that it would spoil the women too. Although again, we have to, Dabney's filter is men lead all of this. Well, okay, we can see that that's not always true. So it's like with a lot of stuff that we talk about, you have to sit there and go, okay, you're saying something good. Okay, that's good. That's not, and we're going to set that aside over here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're the nuance show. We're not the we're not just gonna.
This is not hagiography, Nick.
You can
It's
even
like,
go
don't
back
worry.
to Genesis.
I did take this with a critical lens.
You can even go back to Genesis, and a lot of church fathers say Adam committed the greater sin when he listened to his wife, and that was a thing that
I have heard that
created the downfall. But the trigger, the entrance of the sin was through the woman.
That's correct.
So who was more responsible? So we can kind of take that same aspect here. Yeah, maybe this sinful stuff can come in through the woman, but yeah, I guess you can make an argument that the man might actually be more responsible.
All right. Now that's really interesting because I'm gonna get back to blaming the men here on when it gets to divorce here. He talks about unjust reasons for divorce, but he lays continuously the blame on man. He perhaps has an unconscious view of men being to blame for messed up marriages and divorce and not the women. So he says, neither decline of love nor developed incompatibility is just cause of divorce. The former plea is unjust because the party making it was to blame for having his love decline. Men are responsible for the decay of an affection which they spontaneously profess because first the coldness of actual always grows gradual by steps of their own neglect or petulance or provocation from which they could have abstained. If the husband had faithfully fulfilled the offices of beneficence to the wife, as he had vowed and as he could have done if he had chosen, he would have continued to love her with all her faults. Example speaking on expanding divorce law. Such laws virtually propose to the fickle husband that he shall treat his wife with such injustice as becomes intolerable to her, and then advance this natural result of his own wickedness as entitling him to cast her off. So, man, bad. But this is not true. Again, a lot of times a man can love a woman and she's still a stone cold bitch.
Okay. This might have been true in his time.
Yeah,
because
but still,
women didn't have recourse. They didn't have recourse to child support. They didn't have recourse to alimony and to getting half of his money. There was no social welfare system. So women were really had a few options. So they tended to stay in marriage. So it's possible during his time that all the divorces he saw, or the majority, were by men of this nature. And keep in mind, when he's talking about divorce here, he's talking about 1 in 100 marriages or 2 in 100 marriages, not 60 in 100 marriages.
Right.
So, I mean, his observations might still be true today, that 2% of divorces are actually caused exactly by this stuff, because I don't think
and does happen.
the overall nature of men have changed.
No, man can do this. But you notice that there's nothing about the coldness of a woman or the things that scripture talks about, trying to restrain the wind or oil through the hand or dwelling in the desert or dwelling on the corner of a rooftop than with a contentious or quarrelsome wife, right?
Well, is that because, as Steve mentioned, the women might stay with the guy because there's no social welfare system, but are they cold to the guy? Are they, this gets to a little bit simpy here, because what he's trying to say is, well, you didn't love her enough for her to love you back. The quote is, it's above the top. There was like the beneficence of the man or something, right?
That's not true. You see that with the red pill. That's not true.
And so just because the woman doesn't get divorced, I think, doesn't mean that she hasn't decided that she's no longer in love with the guy, and doesn't mean that there's not dead bedroom situations going on. We have no data on that from back then, because even asking would have been considered high scandal. Right. Yeah. So, we'll never know, but I suspect there's a lot more of that going on than, and he might be casting sort of a blind eye towards it.
Well, let's also consider Dabney. I mean, the guy was probably absolutely brilliant.
He was.
And he was in his logical mind all the time. And there's probably few people he could have a equal conversation with, and almost no women. So he didn't have intellectual discussions with women, and he probably loved his wife by an act of will up from his mind. But I don't think he was a very emotional man. He's just very strong-willed and driven. And so he's coming from a different place. He's of a different mindset. He's kind of maybe he's a little bit spurgy.
But he's
It-
also in an old world situation, hasn't completely fallen apart. It's fallen apart as he's speaking, but
Yes.
he's not living in the same era we are living in right now. He
That's
talked
true.
about it. He prophesied about it. And we live in the end of time result of it. So we got to be careful with nature doesn't change, right? Truth doesn't change. Situations can change. There could be more degeneracy in a certain society at a certain time. Degeneracy is pretty much always there since the fall, but it can ebb and flow.
Well, I think it goes back to what you were saying about the Bible, because the Bible talks about this stuff.
It did.
And
It does.
he is a theological scholar, so he would have read those passages too. And his unwillingness to say it, I think, is kind of like, well, okay, dude. You know what I mean? It's like even in intellectual space, he should have been able to acknowledge that the Bible says certain things about women, and that probably holds true in his day as well.
It's interesting how the Bible said that when another man went through some crappy experiences, Solomon. I don't think he intellectually learned that. I think he did that through experience and observation.
Yeah, Solomon. Yeah, well, he had over 1,000 various wives and concubines. Guy had a little bit of experience with women, and one of the few men in history to have a statistically relevant sample size. So if Solomon speaks about women, guys, it's from a statistically valid sample size. Just saying.
Okay, so Dabney has some things right. He has some things wrong. But where did he see all this stuff arising from? Well, as a lot of people during his day, he saw this coming, and we spoke about this on the with consent of the governed exposing the narrative video.
Mm-hmm.
He saw it as more of an atheistical libertine philosophy, that of the Jacobins, following the thought of people like Rousseau, some of Locke, and the social contract, and Hobbes. He saw that this was a foreign concept. This was a unbiblical concept that the abolitionists, particularly of the North, had taken and shoved down the South's throat, and was threatening the whole Christian order and way of life. And so this idea of making everyone equal, not just equal before the law, but abolishing order, abolishing a hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean,
no longer.
The Seneca Falls Convention was, I mean, you're pulling from works that were 1960s and 70s, so this is 10, 20 years before. He would have had some understanding that there was.
He did.
Yeah, he would have had to. That there was something going on that was very what we would call egalitarian today.
Mm-hmm. It comes from the saying of the Jacobins.
Can I mention the historical elephant in Dabney's room?
Sure.
Which one?
Which one? Oh, there we go.
Okay. Slavery.
There. I'll
Now,
pull that up.
okay. Yeah, I'm going to talk about slavery. I'm not advocating slavery, but I will say the Bible talks about slavery. St. Paul calls himself a servant, or was it doula? Is that the right word? To Christ? Yeah. Slave to Christ. Slavery was part of society, and it was understood. And it was part of a hierarchy. And the Bible never calls actual slavery a sin.
It does not.
And I'm not advocating slavery, okay? I just
I'm
want
not
to say
either.
that. I'm just saying, as an analogy, slavery existed. Now, at the time he's writing this, slavery was abolished. And also, at the same time, the husband-wife relationship is changing. That women are claiming equal rights, just like the slave wanted equal rights to the master. It's equality. So when you lose the concept of the hierarchy, which is evidenced by slavery, and historically through the Bible, and that has connotations to the husband and wife relationship as well. So this was a great time of social upheaval in the core of, or the foundation of society, which is the family. In slavery, the abolition or abolishment of slavery has a direct effect on that. And I think this also speaks to the different mentality between the Northerners and the Southerners. Most of the Southerners did not own slaves, but they
No, they didn't.
probably had a different mental understanding of what it meant. I mean, it was just part of their culture that they understood at a deep level. Not that they were promoting slavery, they just understood of being a slave to Christ and of being a bond servant and being obedient. To that extent, we don't understand it today.
Oh, there's so much I could say here.
All right.
I'm not going to, because it's not the purpose of the stream, but there's so much I could say.
But, you know, I just want to bring it up because I want to make people think.
Right. And so like I'm gonna get to Dabney and Jacobinism and slavery and feminism here real quick. A couple different slides. But so you think of Redpill, right? It awakens one to one part of the Jacobin world. That would be for Dabney. If I assumed he was living today and he could listen on this discussion, I think he would make that point. You know, Red Pill talks about the worldview of gynocentrism, the feminist worldview. But this worldview is only possible because of a broader groundwork, that of the Jacobins. So Jacobin centrism, which coalesced with heretical feminist movements, and he talks about that in the Public Preaching of Women article. There's like Anabaptist Unitarians, Antinomians, Quakers, Methodists. But Dabney doesn't quite focus on those for the growth of feminism. He lays the blame of the Jacobins, because that was what overthrew the South in an imposition of its Jacobinism by the Union, particularly of radical Republicans and the abolitionists. And the Practical Philosophy, which he wrote in 1897, so I think that was like the last book he wrote before he died. Dabney, the philosopher theologian, writes, "To the Jacobin, the Commonwealth is the only God, beyond which there is no umpire, no judge, no avenger. Again, upon this theory, the supreme rule of this Commonwealth's action has no standard whatever of intrinsic righteousness and immutable justice, embodied first in the moral perfections of the Heavenly Father, and then in the universal and indestructible judgment of the right human conscience. But the ultimate standard of right is the mere will of each greedy and unrighteous creature. For this system, there is no morality to enforce duties or guarantee rights except the human laws. These are merely the expression of the cravings of this aggregate of licentious, ruthless, selfish wills. This reasoning, of course, makes the will of the majority supreme and says vox populi, vox Dei." So the voice of the people, the voice of God. But it must be remembered that this majority is not only the accidental major mob in which the wicked will of each citizen is his supreme law, so that the god of Jacobinism, whose voice receives a sovereign expression, may at any time reveal himself as a fiend instead of a beneficent or benign heavenly father. The practical government which results from this theory is simple absolutism, differing from the personal despotism of a sultan or a czar only in this one particular, that its victims have that many-headed monster, the mob, for their master, always liable to be more remorseless and greedy in its oppressions than a single tyrant. To this deduction, history gives the fullest confirmation. The democracies infected by this theory have ever turned out the worst despotisms. Such was the government of the Jacobin Party in France 100 years ago, expressly deduced from the social contract, yet a government guilty of more oppressions, stained with more political crimes and murders of the innocent, more destructive of public and private wealth than all the despotisms of Europe together, annihilating in one decade 48 billions of francs of the possessions of the French people, and drenching Europe in a universal causeless war, rendering itself so loathsome to the nation that it is glad to escape from it into the military despotism of Napoleon. The favorite motto of this democracy is liberté, égalité. By the way, that's where you get egalitarianism. So liberté, égalité, fraternité, of which the practical rendering by the actions of the Jacobins was this: liberty, license to trample on other people as they choose, égalité. Similar license for the outs when they could become ins, fraternité. All brothers rogues. So all the worst oppressions and outrages experienced by the people of the United States have been inflicted by the same Jacobinism masquerading in the garb of republicanism. So again, this whole erasing of the order, this egalitarianism, which actually creates a monster and a despotism.
Well, it's back to consent of the governed. There is no hierarchy. The
Right.
hierarchy is inverted because the real power is in the people who are governed and their consent. The victim therefore becomes the leader. The bottom becomes the top because it's all ruled from the bottom, and nobody can tell me what to do. There is no hierarchy. I am the top of the hierarchy. Does that describe Jacobism?
The majority becomes the hierarchy. So whatever the mob rule is, and so
right,
the
but
mob,
I'm part of the
exactly.
mob, and I determine
you're-
what the mob says by my consent to join the mob.
Right.
So therefore,
Right.
each individual is the top of the hierarchy.
Well, and I think here it becomes, and we talked about this in Consent of the Governed, it becomes important to draw a distinction between the way the Constitution was originally written and the way it was amended, let's say, because we talked about this, it was actually the Native American population that was the last to get the right to vote. But we talk about this expansion of the rights to vote. But when you look at the Constitution as originally written, you had to have some skin in the game in order to be considered worthy of being at the top of the governing pyramid, of being the voter, so to speak. Does that, because we're talking about the inversion of that.
That's true, but is Republican a form of government ever a good idea? I mean, we've been indoctrinated into that belief since we're Americans. But was it flawed from the very beginning? Should this be the proper form of government?
Well,
I think it can be, but I don't think it has to be.
Yeah, well, okay, because we have to remember how the Jacobins got where they got, and that was through a series of pretty terrible kings in France. So, it's like when you look at the totality of history, you have to understand that they came up with some pretty radical ideas, but they were pushed there because you can also look back and say there were entire dynasties of kings where people were generally okay with how they were being led. I'm thinking in Britain, they had long runs of kings where people were generally okay with it. So I look at it this way. All forms of government, the governments of men, are subject to the tyrannies of men. There is a benefit in a voting well, strictly speaking, there's a benefit in a rules-based, a law-based form of government where everyone agrees that these are the laws, we're going to follow them, and when they're not followed, you get cracked down on, fines, jail. Okay. Whether that takes the form of kingship or republicanism, I think, is actually the less important question. Because if the kings were following the Magna Carta in Britain, things generally went okay for the kings. The kings were allowed to do king things, and the peasants did peasant things. And, when it came up, it didn't, and when the kings didn't follow the Magna Carta, that's when they got themselves in trouble. So
Right.
that would be my take on it. I think we get so caught up in this idea of republicanism versus king or single head leadership when that's not really the problem.
Probably, but I think monarchies tend to devolve or be succeeded by Republican forms, and Republicans tend to be succeeded by blatant democracy. And we know
Which
how
is where
democracy. Yeah, exactly. So this is a complex issue, and we could. This
we could
really
go on
isn't
for a
a
long time.
discussion of which is the higher, which is
Right,
the best form of government, whether it's monarchy or republic. But we are in agreement that a pure democracy is not the right one.
It's a Jacobinism. It destroys every hope of just government and Christian order.
Well, as I said, I really do admire the way the Constitution is written. I think there was an awful lot of intelligence that was put into how the government was structured, and we set about undoing a lot of it. Particularly with like the 19th Amendment, and other, just even allowing all men, and I mean all males, to vote, I think was probably not the right thing, because once all males get the right to vote, they look at the women and they say, oh, well, if I pull these women in, they will vote with me, and I can now vote myself the public largesse, to quote, I believe, de Tocqueville. So it can only work when the people who are the ones with the skin in the game are the ones who are controlling it. If you don't have any skin, I'm sorry, the only choice you're gonna do is to try and give yourself more of somebody else's skin, which is a different form of slavery, by the way. We call that the tyranny of the majority.
Right.
So you could make an argument that we've traded one form of slavery for another. That I might be open to that.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that he was for republic, a representative government. He was for a hierarchy in family, church, and society or commonwealth. But he also didn't say master and slave has to always be the normal condition of human society, although he did defend it for the South. But there's also similar tactics that we see that in his day that still apply today with feminism, Marxism. Remember, they say patriarchy is abuse, right? They'll say that. And so keep that in mind. So he says it's time that all parties had learned that the lawfulness and policy of different social systems cannot be decided by painting the special and exceptional features of hardship, abuse, or mismanagement, which either of the advocates may imagine he sees in the system of his opponent.
Right. That kind of goes back to what I was saying about, if you don't have any skin in the game as a guy, you look at the other women who also don't have a skin in the game and you say, oh, well, if I pull them in, I can outvote everyone else. And then I can make, my perceived, hardship into the social cause of the day. It's the same tactic.
But why do we have these abuses though? And he gives some sage advice. So no matter the system, right? Well, there's good systems and bad systems, but there's a hierarchy, however you want to put it. Anyways, he says, for unfortunately, the human race is a fallen race, depraved, selfish, unrighteous, and oppressive under all institutions. Out of the best social order committed to such hands, there still proceeds a hideous amount of wrongs and woe. And that not because the order is unrighteous, but because it is administered by depraved man. For the guilty passions of men are everywhere perpetual fountains of wrongdoing. So even if you have like the right order or a good republicanism or whether you have republicanism or a king, you're still going to have problems.
Which is what we were saying earlier.
I'd also like to point out he really shows he's a Presbyterian in that belief in that description of fallen man, using the word depraved and all that. That is the language there is distinctly Presbyterian.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, well, okay.
It is.
That's who he
no
is.
argument.
Yeah.
and
he wrote a book defending Calvinism, so
right.
Well, I mean, I grew up in the Presbyterian Church. Nick was involved in the Presbyterian Church, so yeah, okay. That language is familiar to us, I think.
Right. I'm not getting into an argument whether he's right or wrong. I'm just saying that is distinctly Presbyterian Calvinist language, and his understanding is just grounded in that. You got to understand that about him too.
Yes, you do. If you want to understand a person, you have to understand what they, what their views were, what's their foundation.
And so this Jacobinism, he links it to feminism. He talks about the extreme claim of equality is false and iniquitous, for all the wide natural diversities of sex and character rise wide difference of natural relations. And further he says, or of what avail would it be for me to declare that all women have the same natural right with myself, to wear a beard and to sing bass, not bass, when nature has decided that they shall not, not the singing bass on the wall, but the low voice.
The low voice.
Argue again, the Jacobin doctrine leads by logical consequence to female suffrage and to women's rights. And he says the concession of all equal rights to women means the destruction of the family, which is the cornerstone of the commonwealth and civilization. Boom.
So, is the root of feminism Jacobinism, or is it communism?
Jacobinism preceded Marxism.
Correct. Marx would not have called himself a Marxist or a communist. That wasn't a word. He would have called himself a Jacobin.
Yeah.
Well, right. But a lot of our modern people say that the root of feminism is communism.
Okay. Which it
kind of is, but it even has deeper roots.
Right.
among the Jacobins. I mean, it didn't just arise in communism. I think that's what we're establishing here.
No,
Right.
although having studied Russian history a little bit, the first pure form of feminism arose in shortly. It was the 1920s. This guy named Leon Trotsky. That's where that's where you saw feminism as you might recognize it today first arise, of absolute equality in all things. The United States was much slower to get there, and in fact, the KGB and Russians were quite. Stalin was quite interested in speeding the United States along the Jacobin path. Remember, the Soviet Union was convinced that in order to beat the United States, they needed to convince the United States that to adopt communism. And when we didn't touch on this, but the Yuri Bezmenov that we used in a prior stream, he did touch on this, and he did say that was the stated goal of the KGB, and there are other historical documents that back that up. The Russians wanted us specifically to adopt communism, and they did that by infiltrating our colleges and promoting all sorts of Jacobin doctrine, feminism, egalitarianism.
Called the Comintern,
Yes.
which to people who haven't heard that term, Communist International. It's an abbreviation. Comintern, and that was part of a big part of how they were going to propagate communism internationally. There was a lot of study in that, and how do we diffuse this and get the people to rise up and throw off their oppressors and join us in the wonderful world of communism.
Now, I want to make a note here for people who don't know the history of this. While Stalin was pushing feminism in the United States through our school system, he abolished it in the 1950s. He did away with it completely. In fact, to the point where he had the KGB kill Leon Trotsky with an ice axe. Very Russian way to kill somebody.
And that happened in Mexico, right?
I think it was Argentina, but yeah, it was somewhere in somewhere south of the United States. Leon Trotsky was run out of the Soviet Union by the KGB before that, and Leon Trotsky was the guy who brought feminism to what you would call pure feminism to the Soviet Union. That is what Stalin, the guy who's pushing feminism into the United States, thought of feminism for the Soviet Union. He knew it wouldn't work, and so he just, I mean, he's a dictator, so he just got rid of it. He said, no, we're not doing that anymore.
Well, they decided, they'd seen the effects because it was implemented in 1917, and was it Alexander Kollontai who was the woman and propagated this, and they did no fault divorce and abortion, and it was just devastating their birth rate.
Yep.
And they knew, holy shit, this is destroying our country. We're not going to have any young people. We're not going to have enough men to fight a future war. Okay, that's enough. It damn near destroyed us. End of that. Let's export this elsewhere so we can destroy our enemy.
That is the history of feminism. That's why they pushed it so hard through our colleges. At the same time, they were getting rid of it. The people who tried it first knew it wouldn't work, and so they got rid of it. Folks, that is the history of feminism.
It destroys. You have to get rid of it, as Dabney predicted.
Yeah.
And it lives out. You see the example. It destroys civilization. It destroys families. If it destroys the family, it'll destroy the church. And
it is destroying the church.
The Commonwealth. What?
It is destroying the church right now.
Absolutely.
Keith, the Bible even says that. Proverbs 7:1. The wise woman builds her house, and the foolish one tears it down with her own hands.
They
So
raise
once
a
she's in
bastard
charge,
progeny.
feminism becomes predominant. It's destructive. That's what Proverbs says on a wide basis, where the Bible says it on an individual basis.
And so Dabney was saying, look, you need to, he's fighting for the hierarchy, saying this is absolutely destructive. Don't do it, you know. And he says, this is what's going to happen. And it happened. Was he right on everything about men and women? No, he's a bit of a, I don't say a white knight, but, you know, a simp a bit, you know, common for his age, but he should have known better. But he does also give a little nugget. Here's a little practical nugget, even though they call this financial abuse in some circles. You know, he does talk about traits for a godly man, especially in his biography, Stonewall Jackson: courage, steadfastness, fearlessness, truthfulness, you know, chastity, being a breadwinner, putting forth sturdy effort, being a breadwinner. It's incumbent on man as being a stronger sex. He does demand and teach that women should give affection and obedience to their husbands, that man is to be the protector, even at the cost of his life. But interesting nugget here. He says, again, the law of the land holds the husband sternly responsible for the support of his family and payment of its debts. What the wife expends, he is compelled to pay for. So I think this nugget right here is really important to take to heart, even for men today. Hence, he must be entitled to the authority of deciding what shall be expended. The wife who should claim irresponsibility in this matter would inflict a flagrant injustice and would virtually reduce the husband to the relation of a slave to her caprices and a helpless victim of her tyranny. The party who is bound to pay has the obvious right to decide for what he shall be bound. So basically, husbands, men, control the finances. Don't have a joint bank account. Or if you do have a joint bank account, only let it be for, you know, joint expenses. Have
That's
your
what we
money
do.
separate.
That's what we
Have
do.
your money separate.
It works, guys. That's what we do.
Dabney knew. Hey, it's not the evil red pill. It's not the new age patriarchy or anything. These madmen. No. Puritans
So,
taught something similar, and here Dabney does too.
Let me point something else out. Let's say you got $10,000 extra, or you've built up $10,000. If you put that in where your wife can get her hands on it, isn't that a big temptation? Why do you want to, subject her to that temptation? Be more caring about her, so you're not going to tempt her with that. Would that be good advice, Nick?
Yeah, don't do what I did.
Well, and me. I mean, I'm just pointing out. You can look at this not as a control
learned the
matter.
hard way.
It's just like, I'm being very loving by not subjecting you to this temptation.
That's correct.
No. That's not love. No, that's financial abuse.
Everything's abuse these days. Anything that a man does that's manly is abuse.
Specifically, in today, abuse is you didn't give me what I want when I demanded it.
Uh-huh.
And what Steve is really saying here is, if you put this money in front of them, I have watched how women operate with money. If they see money in the bank account, they go, oh, that's money I can spend. They're not thinking about the rent's due 2 weeks from now. You know, they're not thinking about the car repair bill that's going to come in, or the car note payment, right? They're thinking, oh, I've got $3,000 to spend. Let's go shopping. And they pull out their phone and they just start clicking buttons, and some stuff magically appears at your front door. And then the rent check doesn't clear. And then women get on TikTok.
that's not
So I
her
think
problem. When it comes time to pay the rent, she'll go, honey, we don't have enough money in our account to pay the rent. You better work harder.
Yeah, they do that.
so, guys. We could pull up the. I'll mention a few other things of Dabney. We were going to pull up. I'm not going to pull up the whole Women's Rights Women article that I did disperse. So if you want to look at Dabney's views on women, particularly, there's Women's Rights Women and the public preaching of women. You can find like Log College Press under the library or Dabney. I suggest you check him out. But so Dabney was against women preachers. He was against women officers in the church. He thought they should be silent in the church, have head coverings, and submit to the hierarchy. He thought that this women's rights women was absolutely a rebellion against God, an abomination, and would unsex the woman, make her a feeble man, and destroy the marriage and destroy society.
Well, I'd say he was pretty accurate on that so far.
He was pretty accurate. But I guess we can close with this, guys. Is Dabney red pill?
Not as we would think of it today.
How
because,
so?
Because of his unwillingness to name and shame female behavior to the point where he skips over biblical passages to that effect.
As far as we know. But from what I've read, it does seem that way. He constantly laying blame at the man's feet. Not that man doesn't sometimes bear responsibility or can be neglectful. Sure. But when we call is there a little anachronism when we ask the question, is he red pill?
Well, sure. The term also didn't exist back then.
Right.
But he doesn't really talk about the nature and traits and behavioral patterns of women, which is what we think about as red pill. He does accurately predict consequences, and maybe he knew more and he just couldn't write about it or wasn't prudent to do so. But yeah, he doesn't. He never uses the word hypergamy.
Well, he's definitely against evolution. In fact, he wrote against Darwin in his
so he doesn't like evo-psych. Okay,
absolutely not.
Okay. So is he red pill in the modern sense? Probably not.
But he was I still think that red pill guys could really benefit from reading Dabney. Purely from a logical consequence point of view of rejecting order, a hierarchy. And for these pickup artists who think that they're these masculine men, but really they're imbeciles. And Dabney's correct on that.
I think the red pill could benefit from reading about from the perspective of particularly here is what your behavior is doing to the society. Here's how your plate spinning is contributing to the problems in society. And we went over that, and yeah, he gets a little simpy in there, and the knee-jerk reaction will, of course, be, but he's just a simp. I don't need to listen to him. But I think we made the point earlier on that, yeah, but you guys don't, when you're just chasing tail, you don't have frame either. If you're chasing tail. You don't have frame if you're chasing something. You're trying to put yourself in that frame that you're chasing. So it's a bit rich to come in and say, oh yeah, I'm this big masculine guy who's got so much frame. Girls, they just, no. At best, you could say that you have frame and you are just imbibing of what women are offering you. But you're doing so without any concern for the consequences of what you're doing.
Well, you're really naive and you don't understand what's going on if you don't know history. And uh, evo-psych is, yeah, maybe it makes some sense. But you notice how they use evo-psych and go back to hunter-gatherers, and they just jump over all history and all the movements and how we got to where we are. It's a Cliff Notes version, which negates all history. So yeah, going back and understanding historically what happened. And here's another document. You don't have to believe it, but Casti Connubii, which was a papal encyclical written in 1930. 1930 was a key date because that's when the Anglican Church first approved the use of contraception. And all Christian churches prior to that time were absolutely against contraception. This was the Catholic Church's response to that, and it includes a lot of predictions as to what would happen. Now, I'm not telling you to believe it or become Catholic, but go through that and okay, it's another document that is historical. It lets you know what the discussions were at the time and what some of the arguments were against it, which maybe came true, just like Dabney's predictions came true.
And for that reason, he described the reality that much of the red pill men are reacting to and trying to understand. He understood a lot of it, maybe not everything about female nature, but he understood the situation that men find themselves in today as a logical consequence of these movements. So in
Well,
that sense, he may be a patriarch.
well, and you don't necessarily have to understand female nature to look at the abolition of hierarchy and say, that's not going to end well for you guys in the future.
No, it didn't end well.
Right. So, does the study of female nature help us with our current problem today? Yes,
Right.
absolutely. It does, unquestionably. And I think we should continue to do that because it's something that, as you can even see in Dabney's sort of glossing over of female nature, that has been missing through, I'm not going to say throughout history, because going back to the sirens, the Iliad and Homer, they did understand it. It's just something that we've kind of gotten away from understanding and we need to go back to.
It's interesting Solomon understood it.
Exactly. Right. So there have been times throughout history where it was understood, female nature was understood much better than it is now. So I do view red pills, the red pill guys, as some of them, not all of them, as doing scholarly work. Whether or not it's done in the academic form of scholarship, I think is actually irrelevant. But my hope is that we can take what we have learned in history about the importance of hierarchies, bring that back, and then as well at the same time bring back in the study of female nature.
Right.
Because when you look at history, those were the quote unquote best times in history.
And perhaps Dabney didn't have so much problem with, not to say it wasn't there at all, but the men back then weren't completely emasculated either. So
That's true.
they were taught virtues. They were taught to be strong. They were taught to have authority in the home. They were taught not to be cowards, but to be fearless. They were taught to be providers, even though some didn't do it. Society understood that, and to some sense reinforced it.
I'd say they expected it.
And they expected it. And the men were raised on the classics too, which is interesting because
Right.
I'm pretty sure he knew some of those classic works.
Well, I think the South had a lot of that,
Mhm.
and it continued on because most of our military, uh, the Army, they recruit heavily from the South. Those Southern men have a great sense of duty, and it
Yep.
was in their culture in the Civil War era, and it survived the Civil War. And it's taken a long time. It's been on the decline, just as the northern states have been, and it's been contaminated probably by a lot of uh, Yanks coming down there and settling. And so I don't even know. I never lived in the South, but there's probably a lot less animosity uh, for Yanks moving down there. But what in my youth or when I was like 20, yeah, I mean, that was still talked about. I don't know if it is anymore.
Well, it's still talked about, but not so much anymore. There's other issues, more pressing issues to deal with than that now.
Well, I can tell you, based on what's come across my news feed, that U.S. Army recruitment is down, and it's down bad. And if they're pulling a lot from the South, which I do know to be true,
Mhm.
what's the name of the fort down there that they do all the training? It's in
Hood?
Georgia. Yeah, Fort
Oh,
Hood. Yeah.
that's Texas. Fort Hood.
Or no, yeah. It's Fort Hood does a lot of training too. They're more tanks and armor. Fort Benning does a lot of the infantry training. Yeah, and that's in the South for a reason.
Well, a lot of these family members grew up and they had military careers, and now a lot of them are advising them not to.
Mm-hmm. Which is yet another result of destroying everything that was built over the past few hundred years.
Right.
Is woke, and they're saying don't go into the military. It's too woke. Does that mean is woke a form of feminism?
Yeah, it's
Oh, yeah.
another offshoot of feminism. Yeah, just more destroying things that people care about, destroying culture, destroying tradition, destroying the hierarchy. Why would you want to fight for that?
Oh man, we could do a whole stream on because this question has come up around my around in my personal dinner table again. Is what are the chances of civil war in the United States? And I get it. It's very it is that time of the cycle again where we have to start talking about it. But I think that number really speaks to how hard a civil war would be to actually do. Like,
If there might be some kind of civil war, but it's not going to be state versus state.
nope.
It's going to be woke versus based, or immigrant versus former military. We could have some strife, and you could call it a civil war because it could be infighting within our country, but it's not geographic region against geographic region.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is the mixing over the past 4 years has actually gone up significantly. You have a lot of Californians leaving California for other states. New York had the biggest decline of population in their history last year. They lost like 380,000 people or something like that. If my number's wrong, I'm sorry. I don't have it in front of me.
2.61%.
Okay.
Their
That's a lot.
population went down by 2.61%. They were by
That's
far the highest. That's huge.
So, and those, a lot of those people who are moving out of New York are headed for Florida, the South.
Yeah, boomer retirements.
Yeah. So the mixing now would actually like I could get into a whole thing, and maybe one of these days we'll do a stream on the Civil War. The term for what Steve was describing is low level civil war. It's described as frequent riots that end, somebody gets hurt or killed. It's described as, it would actually look a lot more like what we would call terrorism. people go in, blow up a shopping mall.
Gosh.
And
Well, it might be city folk against country folk.
I have a map for that. It's a map that I love showing to people because it really demonstrates how that works. And there's a lot of, maybe we have to do an ETN on this, because there's a lot of things that people have not thought about in the terms of just the logistics of a civil war. And so we would get into maps and, who lives where, who controls what. It might be worth doing. I can probably put it together if y'all want to do it and see about it. Drop us a comment if you do.
That'd be interesting.
It has some it does have some weird sort of like, really, that's what would actually happen kind of moments to it. But there's a lot of what I will say, and this has actually came up recently. Biden did another thing. Oh, they need they'll need F-15s. And I have a lot to say on that comment specifically. So yeah, maybe we'll do one. As I said, drop a comment if you want to see it. So,
well, yeah. Okay. Now, we don't get a lot of people watching this live. There are a growing number of people who are watching this after it's posted.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we absolutely want to hear from you. And if you have a topic that you want us to go into, yes, you're going to have to leave us a comment, and we will take notice of it. And we're looking for things to talk about that people want to hear. Yeah, we got plenty of ideas. We're not going to run short of them because there's 3 of us and we divvy up the work. But yeah, we want to engage with people out there.
Well, the CCS last week with the corn question, that was actually questions from a viewer. Now, they DM'd us, but that's their prerogative. And around corn, I understand completely. But we are open to questions. We're a group of thinkers, and we're also a group of guys who like diving into data and history, and maybe we can come up with some answers you didn't think you would hear. So, yeah.
All right, guys. So, Dabney. It's definitely worth delving into. He doesn't get everything correct. He's right on hierarchy. It's good practical wisdom. He predicted where we are. He doesn't seem to understand female nature really well. There's some
Nobody's
other church
perfect.
fathers that have done better, other Puritans, other reformers, probably other Catholic theologians as well, and some red pill guys. But I think while they might use some evo-psych terms, ignore the evolutionary part and take note of the actual observations and data that they use.
Mm-hmm.
That can be very helpful.
Well, and just to tack onto that, guys, stop getting so caught up in the language and the words people use. Focus more on what the idea or the concept they're trying to get across. Pedantics is one of the basest forms of sophistry. It's not a good way to tone policing is even worse, but it's just not a good way to debate and try to disprove ideas. Well, you used the wrong words. Okay.
You mentioned
Did you get
Dabney,
my
so they're
idea?
not going to listen to this.
True. But
Yeah,
it's just listen to the ideas, listen to the concepts. Don't get caught up in the language. It's not worth the effort for you.
Don't be
All right, guys,
afraid
any
to
closing?
listen to guys that you don't fully agree with, because you will refine your thought. I'm not saying listen to degenerates, but you know what? It's nice to refine your theories and listen to people who are adjacent to the area that you're interested in.
They might have some observations that you didn't think of.
You mean you guys have observations that I don't think of?
I don't know, Nick. You are the I can't finish it. I don't know.
Well, our text message show that we don't always agree. So
No.
It wouldn't be any fun if we agreed on everything.
that'd be
That's
boring.
true.
So
All right, guys,
on
we'll
now, well, go ahead, close, and then we'll introduce our
Any
show for
closing
next
thoughts,
Monday.
guys? Closing thought. Or did we already do that?
I think I did mine.
I
did
don't
mine
have any
too.
closing thoughts. I just want to punch or talk about our show coming up on Monday.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so it's part 2. Trentosaurus versus Godzilla. Part 2. So we only got through half of the analysis of Trent Horn and his view of, is the red pill a dead pill? We have fun with that one. So watch the one on Monday and tune in on next Monday.
All right, guys,
Well-
please like and subscribe
Please do.
to the
And-
to the resurgence of sanity. And Plutarch, what were you saying?
I was just gonna say, and drop a comment. If you have ideas or you think we're wrong, or I'm sure somebody in the comments will want to rake Nick over the coals for bringing up Dabney at all.
You're Huckleberry.
So yeah, that's all I have, and I guess we'll see y'all on Monday.
All right, guys, take care.
But
Bye.